Alright, let's start the video. So let's discuss logistics and its importance. Now, the military is obviously the first one most people think of when it comes to logistics because that's where the name is from. But for the economy as well, it is also important. The supply chain is just a bunch of logistical work. Making sure things get where they need to be is the essence of logistics, and making sure it's transported in enough quantity at a timely manner is vital to many aspects. So let's say you have a country. Here we shall have a poorly drawn New England. Now, naturally, this poorly drawn New England is going to need to get things from place to place to supply its many different territories, as well as deal with a number of different aspects of its maintenance. And so, how do you get things from A to Z, or A to B? Well, you use transportation. What transportation depends on the exact situation, but it could be anything from trucks to trains. If it's people, there's the possibility of trolleys, cars, busing, and so on. What these are used for is rapid movement of goods and services from different places. Now, this is just the ground, but if you factor in air as well as sea transport, you can factor in planes, boats, barges, which are slightly different from boats. They don't have the ability to move on their own, and to a lesser extent, submarines. They aren't going to be transporting a lot of goods, more so people, in particular military members. But, needless to say, all of these, plus helicopters, forgot those, are going to move things from A to B and resupply. Now, why is this important? Well, moving things from A to B ensures steady supplies. So, for example, food. Let's say there are two cities here, and one produces food, and the other produces tools. Now, in order to supply city A or city B, we naturally need to move the goods there. And so, using trucks or other mechanical other transportation, there it is. I don't know why I want to say mechanical. Regardless, using trucks and other different entities of transport to move things back and forth between the two ensures, among other things, that these supplies get where they need to be. Now, for basic economics, this is great because, well, if the tools are going one way and the food's going another, cities A and B don't need to specialize. They don't need to diversify as much, and they can instead specialize in what they're best at and trade for the rest. This allows for more efficient economies and scale, thus increasing the amount of tools and the amount of food. How does this play out outside of that? Well, let's say a disaster is struck. This place, we'll call it C, was just hit by a hurricane. Well, there are a few things that need to happen. One, you need to get people out of there. Two, you need to get supplies in there. Not just medical supplies, but food, water. It's a horrible water droplet, but regardless. And, of course, building materials. So long as those are needed, you gotta move them in and get the people in danger out. How do you do that? Again, transportation. You use logistics. You organize convoys. You make sure everything's moving efficiently. Clear out paths so that people can go places without getting interrupted by debris. And you make things more and more efficient so that all these things that need in, get in, and all the people that need out, get out. And in war, this is especially important. Let's go back to the US Civil War. Right? So we have the North and the South. Now, even if the South had the same population, let's say they're roughly even in terms of population and production. Well, guess what? If the North is able to get 300,000 people mobilized, and it only takes them 5 months, then that's going to be a challenge for the South if it takes them 6 months to mobilize 300,000. That slower mobilization makes it harder to combat threats and replace losses. So if, say, 50,000 were just lost one day, well, guess what? That's going to take around a month to replenish them and get them back on the front line, so you have the same number of troops. It's why, for example, we see Russia, despite having a larger population and even arguably a larger industry than Japan during the Russo-Japanese War, Japan was able to beat Russia because they could get their stuff there first, push out, and secure territory. It didn't matter if Russia had a giant army over in the western part of its territory. In the east, in Siberia, they didn't have as many people, and because the Trans-Siberian Railway wasn't modernized and ready to transport more people, Japan was able to get in more and more people faster than Russia and overwhelm them quickly, and thus beat Russia at war, despite having numerous disadvantages that would otherwise make it impossible. And so, naturally, logistics plays a very heavy role in governance. Every time you think of a policy, if it cannot be moved to where it needs to be, if you cannot organize supplies to fit your plans and agenda, guess what? Your plan will go nowhere. It doesn't matter if you're trying to do a disaster recovery, like, say, a California wildfire, hurricane in Florida, flooding in Texas, whatever. Or if it's a war, like, for example, Iraq or Afghanistan. Or maybe you just want to improve our internal trade network and our infrastructure so that more trade can happen. If you don't have the resources to do that and can't organize everything, guess what? You're not going to succeed at what you want. In order to have an effective government, you need logistics. You need to factor in, how do I get things from point A to B? How do I make sure medicine gets where it needs to be for when bad things happen? How do I make sure that our companies can buy things that they need so they can keep running? And so that becomes a major part of any talk about, well, how do we do this thing? What are your supply lines? What is the infrastructure available to transport things? What are your organizational capabilities, and how much can you muster up in a certain period? That is all important when thinking about an economy or governance. To take another example, look at the US southern border. There's a lot of people along that border that are patrolling it. All of them need food, water, occasionally restocks of supplies because they use them trying to defend it and enforce the law there. Well, if we are unable to do that, those border patrol, they starve. They can't do their job, and so they'll either quit or they'll die. Or maybe they'll mutiny. One of the three. Regardless of which one they do, though, it leaves you in the exact same position. You are now less able to secure your border in that situation. And so naturally, you cannot have a strong border policy because you can't support it with resources. Fun fact, that's actually why Alaska was sold, at least in part. Russia could not sustain long-term governance on Alaska, so they said, alright, we'll sell it, we'll at least make some money off of it, and then we won't have to deal with the logistical burdens of taking care of this faraway territory that just made us look bigger on a map. That's what they looked at it as. And so, naturally, you have a situation where a territory had to be given up. And keep in mind, Alaska is a very valuable territory for the U.S. It is producing a lot of oil. Previously, it produced a lot of gold, which in a gold-based economy, like the gold standard, very important. It has a lot of natural gas. And fun fact, we get a lot of coal and other mineral reserves as well. Alaska produces a lot of important things for the Union. If the US didn't get Alaska because Russia couldn't handle it, think about the tremendous impact that would have, not just on modern America, but on the US throughout history. After the Victorian era is over and we get into the World Wars, it's a place that Japan would later attack, specifically its islands, to attempt to basically build a little staging ground so that the US couldn't come near. During the Cold War, it was fortified to heck and back. And then, of course, we have now, where Alaska is a consistent, if questionable, border with Russia, where on occasion Russian fighters will actually like to check the US border by flying a bit too close. And so, if Russia still holds Alaska, well, then that presents a very interesting situation. Because of logistics, they were unable to. And the US, which is far closer and more importantly, had the shipping ability to move supplies to Alaska, is now in control of it and thus can maintain it much better. And so that's the big thing when you're thinking of logistics. It is not a matter of, well, can it be done? It's a matter of how. And more importantly, what supplies are you able to get to that location? Because if you can't answer the how, then the if is impossible. How do we achieve this thing? If you don't know, then it can't be done because you can't implement it as policy, especially for a state. You got to figure out how you can do something first. Organization, logistics. It is the backbone of an economy, of a military, of any action done by a governing body that requires supplies to be moved, resources to be managed. And I don't know if you know this, but a lot of government policy is literally just, well, how do we manage what we have? That is the fundamental of it. And so, if you neglect logistics, you neglect your ability to do. If you lack the ability to do, you stagnate. And stagnation, while others are growing, is in effect decline. Thus, maintain logistics. Anyone who has any interest in politics, or even doing your own thing, trying to set up any project, the same applies. If you want things to work, you gotta make sure you can get what you need, where you need it, in an efficient manner without much latency. Otherwise, you will be unable to do what you desire or need to do. That'll be all.